plan and schematic design, and then the project will go on hold for funding strategies and bond. And then if that's successful, at some point kick back into design, and we'll have about 7 or 8 more months of design work and construction drawings, and then it would be bid and permit, and then construction would probably be about a year. And we would expect to have other community input throughout that other phase of design after we start back up. And I'll pass it over to David to talk through the criteria and priorities for the project.
Great. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for having us today digitally as part of your meeting. We started by thinking about actually what the story is that we'd like to be able to tell at the end of design, and start thinking about that at the very beginning so that we can realize the goals of the community. We made this list, which we are continuing to edit and expand, but we just wanted to share this with you to help you understand the kind of things that we're thinking about in terms of that story that we want to be able to tell to the public with the design of this library. So we want the library to be efficient. We want it to be kind of humble and cost effective, getting directly to it serving its purpose for the community. We want it to have low operation and maintenance costs over time. We know those budgets are always limited, and we want to make sure that the library is really responsible in that way. We want to make sure that we can tell a story of having really involved the community, and not just tell the story, but really involve them in the process. And this next one is super important to our meeting today, and it's thinking about how this library can be really sensitive to the park that is there, and really preserve and hopefully help and add to the experience of the park and the asset that it is for the community, and have there be a real synergy between the two. And that's where we get to the next one of shared use of the site, thinking about how this library can actually make the park better in some ways, and actually attract more people actually to the library, and through bringing people to the library, attract more people to the park. In terms of sustainability, really thinking about how the building is energy efficient for long-term savings, that it's a healthy environment with great daylight, makes good use of water and deals with stormwater in really responsible ways. Potentially looks at being a low carbon to no carbon building, that it provides the community with an evacuation resource in the event of disaster to promote resiliency and safety. And that the library program itself is really innovative, provides community space that you currently don't have, is welcoming to everyone, and is a safe space for people in the community. And then lastly, really thinking about the character of the building, how it can reflect Coos Bay in particular, its history, culture, the landscape there, the beauty of the surroundings, and how it can actually enhance the park through it being there and provide flexibility over time.
This is just the project program, and this is all the different spaces that we're planning in the building. And we have a library programmer that's been working really closely with Sammy and Christina and the staff at the library to develop this and ensure it's still valid based on our, it's updated since the 2016. And it results in about a 31,500 square foot building. And so that's what we're planning for the project. And then for site diagrams, Charlie, you want to talk through these?
Yeah, sure.
Oops, something got very distorted in this image on the export. I'm sorry about that. We can just skip it. It was just showing that all the different community organizations that were surrounding the existing site, and the image has gotten distorted there, so I'll just skip it. Oh, this one is too. Back to normal here.
Okay, well, if we think about Toppets Park, we know that especially this end is highly vegetated, and so we're taking that into consideration as we think about the needs of this new development and what those impacts on the forested area might be, whether that's access roads, the buildings, and/or infrastructure. We also know that the tree cover here is incredibly diverse, and the plant typologies are varied, which adds to that richness. One of the things that that we've been thinking about to build on David's comments about sensitivity is how one perceives the park, whether you're in the space, moving through it as a walker or stroller, and how you might perceive the different improvements that come with a library. So these lines, these contours, if you will, of effect suggest that as you move deeper into the park, you become more immersed in the site. And so the resultant observations here are the shallower or the less penetration into the park space, the less immersed, the less impact we have. And so we're being aware of that as well. The trail system is quite robust and improved, right? We know that the Ks for kiosk, that's giving folks that are entering as pedestrians or cyclists that orientation to be able to move through the park, and then quite a wonderful paved system of trails. We also have transit opportunities and that run right here on Newmark, and there's been some initial conversations with the library reaching out to those folks for the county transportation to see if there would be interest in creating a stop at Hull or at Norman Avenue, and they're open to that idea. And that would obviously benefit the park users as well. And from a circulation perspective, we know that there are a couple of intersections here that provide access. The one at Norman that has some improvements, an upcoming development of a fast food facility there on that northwest side, and then at Hull, both of those entrances to the park would require some type of improvement. We've also looked at Leclerc as a possible entry site, and are concerned that the improvements that happen just inside the park in the form of some infrastructure and a pump house preclude that as a viable entry. And then, of course, the parking within the park. From a utility perspective, the primary services that come in on those two streets, Norman and Hull, are focused on water, electricity, and storm sewer, and of course sanitary. So there is some advantage to coming into these built locations. The Hull seems to have the most developed area, and also has higher ground, which has got some advantage for the drainage. And then if we put ourselves into the site and kind of building off of some of those comments around immersive and identity, if we start out here on Newmark at the southeast corner, that is the location that would give us the most public exposure and opportunity to have presence along the public right-of-way. And there's also some, challenges with the grades and challenges with access and parking that come with that site, but that is the public face. Right in the center of this parcel is the Armory, and so there's been some observations about, well, if we are located too close to the Armory, then that becomes our view, and I think we all would agree that is not an ideal view. So how do we look to other sites and other parts of the park area to take advantage of views of the lake? And the solid and dashed views suggest the red ones are views out to the water. So filtered views are dashed and solid views are right onto the water. And then the yellow or goldenrod views are more like into the forest itself. And the light blue I should offer are seasonal wetlands, and those are preliminarily identified. Those have not been confirmed, but are initial suggestions. And upon further project development, a wetlands biologist will go out onto the site and do an actual on-the-ground certification of these areas that would be proposed to be improved. And then the team has also done a series of simple site studies, the solar analysis, again, to determine optimal orientation. We always prefer an east-west orientation from a solar perspective. For daylighting, it's advantageous and reduces heating and cooling and glare. And then wind patterns from the airport indicate predominant wind coming out of the northwest. Doesn't seem to be as big of an issue in our sheltered site, and we've heard from others that live in the area that maybe a little bit more of a northerly wind is to be expected. Also, we would expect big storms typically would come out of the southwest, but it does seems like there's a little bit of a microclimate that's shifting that in this area, in the Bay Area. So that is something that we want to continue to discuss, and that affects really where our doors are in our outdoor spaces. And then the final piece is just making sure that we are comprehending the zoning issues. So we know that we have to be set back from the open water 50 feet, and that early estimates are indicating about 50 parking spaces. And that so how we organize the parking related to the site, how we share parking with and parking improvements with the park. We're not suggesting that we would be taking any parking from the park, but just maybe co-locating that as an option, and then also integrating parking with the natural landscape, the existing landscape, is something that we're tracking. It's a core value that we're looking for. So that's where we're at today with our understanding of the site, and it's led us to these ideas.
Okay, and I can take it from here, Charlie. So this is the part we're excited to bring to you today, sort of sharing with you some of the thought that's gone into it so far about where a building might sit within the park. And we're very excited for your feedback around this. If you can kind of jump in here, Laura. I'm just going to share a handful of different places that we tried to put a building and some of the pros and cons that might go along with that. So the first place, actually, these are in no particular order, but one place that we looked at, and we named each one of these kind of thematically based on what it was doing. So this one, we called it the edge, and it was kind of saying, what if you put the building and the parking as far out of that immersive experience as you could, that diagram that Charlie showed, where as closer you get to the lakes, the more immersed you are in the park. And so it puts parking, it locates the building and parking to the southwest within the park. It uses parking as a buffer to the sort of disorganized backyards of the buildings right on the other side of the property line. And then it would locate the building on the north side of that parking, kind of wedged between that wetlands and the existing trail. And just to orient you to how we're graphically representing these things in these diagrams, we're not going to have a lozenge-shaped building or a lozenge-shaped parking lot, like a big Tylenol or something. Those are just like showing that they're very conceptual. It's just a rough square footage of what the kind of amount of area that you'd have to have. All of the shapes of these would get dramatically refined as we work on them. The dotted line around the building, the red building, is showing if you had a one-story building, whereas the solid part is showing if you had a two-story building. So it's a doubling, obviously, of the area if you have a one-story building, just to show the amount of impact. And I will note, just before we move on, there's this dark gray area that you're seeing on the topography. And we assumed that we would not be building in those areas because the topography is too steep and there's too small of a footprint. So that also, just through deduction, led us to some of the sites that you're going to see us exploring here. So this is one, or A, let's say. And Laura, do we have the pros and cons at this point, or is that's for the next section?
We have the first 5 we looked at. And we don't list the pros and cons, but you might want to. And then we have the refined 3.
Okay, great. So I'd say with that last one, some of the things that I think, and we, by the way, we took our steering committee and walked the entire park and sort of reviewed these sites in person. And I think this site was challenging from the point of view that it's very hard to get to. You actually have to build a road through the wetlands around the end of that little ridge to kind of even get to the parking. And even then, it's sort of a major public experience that is less than ideal given the proximity of all the kind of backyards of the buildings along Newmark. We did appreciate the fact that it was entering off of Newmark, which is an existing right-of-way, but it would actually require working with the Armory to get a little bit more easement so that we can actually get a road to come off of that intersection in that position. And it would be quite disruptive to the wetlands that are in that spot. The other site, the second one we looked at, study B, is we called it the Bluff. And there's a rather flat, open spot here. I don't mean open in the sense that there aren't trees. There are quite a few. But it's flatter. It'd be easier to build on. You could get the parking in the building in this spot, but it would be very deep into the site and would require, again, the same kind of challenges with roadway of having to bring it along some very steep topography, and would require significant intervention into the kind of landscape and topography of the park. Go to the next one. We looked at this site, which we called the clearing, which I think was, it's a really nice position within the park. It is relatively flat, so it could accommodate either the 1 or 2 story building. It also was a spot, we called it the clearing because it's a position within the park where there aren't quite as many trees. It kind of thins out, and the trees that are there are of a much smaller caliper. Again, the challenges with this, similar to some of the other sites, are that it would require quite an intrusion through wetlands in order to get to the site. And then once you're there, a significant amount of mitigation to deal with the wetland presence in that position. We have also subsequently found, we've had some early geotechnical borings returned. And this is also a site that has challenges. It's on some very sandy soil, so would be challenging from in terms of doing building foundations. Also, we looked at a position here along, we called it the ridge. And at the time we made this diagram, we were just kind of putting the buildings and parking in there without a lot of intention other than identifying the area. And what this would suggest is that you could have parking either coming off of an upper road, or you could have the parking added to and expanded from the existing parking down below. This site was really seen as a position that would have the most affinity with the existing public space that's there and the public amenities that are there. Though I think we were, this is kind of early on the exact siting of where the building would go. And you'll see that developed in the subsequent diagrams we're going to share with you. And then the last place, and Charlie alluded to this when what he was talking about, the idea of actually looking at that intersection of LeClaire, and because of the public visual preference, advantage of being on Newmark, people driving by would be able to potentially see the building and see parking immediately. And this was the only position on the entire site that would allow that. And so we felt like it was worth investigating. I think once we went out there, we changed the name of this from the Avenue to the Hole, because the building would have to sit in such a deep, dark hole. That's a very steep topography and very, cut off position for the building. And you would have kind of all the kind of sea of parking kind of right in front of you, also detracting from the public presence of the building. So this very quickly for the committee became one of the least favorite options, but we're very interested in hearing how the park feels about that option as well. So from that group of 5 different sites, we actually, the steering committee met and we just tried to create a short list. And this is that short list. And we actually just tried to develop a little bit better the access to those. And so this is not to limit the kind of comments that we'll get from you today. We're really open to you commenting on anything that you're seeing, including any of those 5 options. but this is kind of where we took it. So we focused really on 3 sites: the bluff, the clearing, and the ridge, because we felt they had the most to offer in terms of what the experience for the public would be, and cumulatively. And so with the bluff, we actually looked at how you could get a road in there. You'd actually do some cross-cut into the slope. There'd be some retaining that would need to be done to bring that in off of Norman Avenue. And then you would arrive, and again, you're seeing either the 1-story, which here is represented as the lighter red, and then the darker red as the 2-story position. And these are the sizes that would be required area-wise for the parking and for the building. I think, and this is in preparation for also, these are the 3 that currently we were thinking we would take to the community. And so we'd also like your comments around that if you think that's wise. If you could zoom in on those for a second, Laura, just so everybody can see them. So we saw this site for the bluff as having, good access off of Norman Avenue, which is currently, it's a relatively safe intersection because it is, 4-way. It has, the building is, for the building and the experience of the library, would be fantastic because you're really immersed in the park. Challenging for construction because it's so deep kind of back into the site, and you'd have to do quite an intervention into the site to get a road back in there. It does require disturbance of quite a bit of wetland. It doesn't really have a view to the lake, if that's a positive. The library doesn't really take any advantage or have any synergy with the existing public amenities. So for example, you might come there to go fishing with your grandchild and have no idea that the library is even out there. It has limited access to daylight because of the extensive tree coverage, though it is really beautiful in terms of connection, like we said earlier, to the forest. The pedestrian access, it does have the advantage of having some potential for access from Ackerman all the way over on the west side of the site. Kind of finding your way in there. It's a little, so there might be a couple of ways pedestrians might be able to find their way in there. It requires extensive tree removal because that is quite a forested part of the site. And one of the positives, it does have good soil conditions up here on the bluff because it's elevated. Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to race kind of through all these, and then we're excited to kind of open it up for dialogue about the whole everything we've shown you here. The clearing, we also looked at, I'll say subsequent to this being one of the favorites of the committee, we also came to find that the soils are quite poor for a building, which was not a surprise given the wetland kind of condition in this position. In this, we were located an access road along that indentation in the topography that's already there that would come off of that parking that currently is in front of the daycare. And that would bring folks down to dispersed parking. We're showing it as one block, but our idea is that it could be more sensitively arranged between existing trees and trying to preserve the wetlands that are there. But no doubt there would be some mitigation required. And then the building would be located on the northern side of that so that people that are moving through the park, as we went for our walk, this position seemed like it was far enough up. You can see the topography kind of climbs up from the lake there. And so it wouldn't have as much visual presence for people walking on the trails around the lake, but would be something that you could find and access from the park if you needed to. And I guess you could actually jump down, Laura, to the pros and cons here, just so we can kind of walk through those, or some of the comments we had. So again, this has some filtered lake views, which is positive. It utilizes the existing clearing, so it would have less tree removal. The vehicle access, we did think there was a way to lace it through some of the wetlands, but there would no doubt be some significant restoration we'd have to do, mitigation. And then the library experience is really immersed in the park, which is great for the library, but also we felt provided a nice balance, also with being in the park, but also not necessarily disrupting the most immersive experience. it's closer to some of the public shared amenities and would at least be on the access, so that people coming in to use the park could at least see maybe, a sign or something that would show, and they would have a glimpse of the library kind of down in the clearing and be aware that it's there. It does have traffic impact on Hull, which we're all kind of getting our arms around right now and trying to understand the current, and we'd love your perception also of what the current traffic issues, if there are any, with how people use the current park, and whether adding, the kind of 50 stalls or so, how much that will impact that intersection at Hull is an open question for us, and what kind of improvements we might have to do there. There is a little bit better potential access to daylight and the potential for solar energy in the clearing site for exactly that reason, that there are less mature trees. It is obscured from the park entry a little bit, so the library is not quite as present as it could be for users of the park that are coming there and parking. It is a relatively flat site, and those are actually kind of hard to come by out there. There's quite a bit of topography on the site, as you all know. And it is one of the best sites if you were wanting to have a one-story building. It's one of the better sites for accommodating that. But as we've added here, it does have problematic soil conditions. And then lastly, moving on to the third site, and we'll open it up here. We were looking at where you could locate a building, and we started to refine this. And in this option, as we refined it, we started to think more and more that it would be advantageous, at least, and we will look at many options if this is the way it goes. We're calling it the Ridge. That this one had the most opportunity for synergy with the existing park amenities. The way it would work, you would kind of come in off of Hull, or you could come off of LeClaire if we found some magical way of dealing with that pump house that currently blocks it, and dealing with the topography of the hole, and create an improved access at LeClaire. So we have two options to explore there for how you actually arrive. But once you arrive and you're kind of coming down, you would share the current infrastructure that's already there for the park. And we imagine this to be able to take advantage of anyone arriving down there, for whatever reason, to take advantage of the park. It has immediate and direct connection to the library for shared use. You can go to the pros and cons here. So some of those are really high visibility for anyone coming to use the park, close proximity to other amenities. It does have traffic impact on Hull, which we need to take into consideration. Has really fantastic views of the lake. I think we came to understand that the university actually has its own, or the college has its own library right across the lake in a similar kind of position relative to the lake. It has shared parking opportunities. The existing slope of the ridge, if we position the building in the right way, may actually have, if it does end up being a two-story library for one reason or another, it could take advantage of accessing, multiple, it could access the top of the ridge as well as the lower level, providing an accessible way for people to kind of move up and into the park. It has minimal impact to existing wetlands. Really one of the better locations for access to solar. It's close to the pedestrian access, for the park entry, and it does have good soils. And I think overall, one of the reasons this site was ending up, one of the preferred sites and people were excited about was just that it seemed to, this is already a position where people are arriving, and so the overall impact to the rest of the immersive experience seemed minimized, but also made the library part of the gateway into the park. And I think those are the two really big advantages that were making people appreciate it. So I think, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, with that, I think that was a lot of talking, and I apologize for that, but hopefully that's given you an overview of sort of the journey that the steering committee has been on so far. And we'd really love to just open it to a conversation with this commission and get your perspective on what we've shown today.
Thank you for the presentation. We have Coco Sutton. Commissioner has a question. Coco? Coco, we can't hear you. Kelly, can you message her that she's muted? We'll come back to Coco. Any other commissioners online have comments?
I can just speak. This is Patty, and I've been and walked around that park for almost my entire time I've been here, and go to multiple entrances, but primarily I access it through Hall Street. And leaving the park, if you're trying to turn left, it's exceedingly difficult. You have to wait till the light changes, and then people just floor it and are going 100 miles an hour because it goes from 2 lanes down to 1, so it can be really dangerous turning left there.
Yeah, I agree with Patty on that. Those are the notes that I wrote down while looking at all 3 of the locations. The main concern is adding more traffic to Hull. I think if we can get out through, through the difficult location, or again, work with the Armory to have some sort of access that cuts back across, so that you can take a look at accessing it off of Norman as a second feeder location. That would be a good location to look at. Looking at the traffic patterns as you head down Newmark, it's not feasible to eventually add a light at Hull, but at Norman, a future light possibility could work there. There is a lot of traffic that comes across on Norman as it is now. So a light location would be excellent. Not that I want to add $1 billion to the budget there, but Coco, are you able to speak now? Unmute yourself.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you. First of all, I wanted to say I really appreciate the topography and the issues concerning solar access and carbon footprint and the wetlands. That was a concern that I had when this was first being talked about, and I appreciate being able to see that. I like the commentation that you put at the bottom with the little sticky notes for number C, the ridge, because it kind of put things that I was concerned about, which were tree canopy, wetlands, soil conditions once you build something that's going to have heavy foundation. I appreciated that. A question that I had, and I don't know if this is a thought process when we're looking at bringing people into the park experience, on the 2-story designs that you were looking at. And the reason I'm looking at 2-story is because climbing walls and things that could integrate a building into a park experience could be utilized in open spaces like that, as well as tree top, roofing, things such as that. Will any of the sites without tons of fill and disturbance be appropriate for 2 stories?
I can answer that question. Yes, all of these sites, whether it's 1-story or a 2-story, the depth of foundation will not vary significantly. That choice can be considered independently.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to jump back to Patty and then to Carmen.
Yeah, my other concern is, again, I've used that park extensively in my time here, and one of the charms of that facility is that it's very natural, and there's not the ability to get to it without walking a large part of it, and it stayed very rustic over the time that it's been a park, and I think that's one of the charms of it. It's not the premier park, it's not the what I call foo-foo-y park like Mingus. It's a park of a different nature that it's the only one like it in Coos Bay North Bend, in a lot of communities. And my concern is that it stays rustic and that electronic access doesn't increase and that you don't ruin the charm of the park by putting in something that's going to bring people to it and more cars, etc.
Thank you, Patty. Carmen?
Hey, y'all. Yeah, speaking to, uh-oh, I'm hearing a echo. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
That's better, Carmen. Thank you.
Okay, it's something to do with my headphones. All right, yeah. Well, speaking to Patty's point, I feel I share the same sentiments. I really wanted to see the park not be intruded on, as much as possible. And I really think that the ridge itself lends a great avenue to be able to access the park in a place that is already kind of a launch point for the park. And, we'll create like a shared usership trying to get people who are approaching either the park or the library an option to experience the other. So I really like that particular site location. Also, because of the soils and the solar access and the minimal impact on the park land itself, I think that's the best spot. And then the other thing I had a question about was I heard maybe a rumor of a possibility of using Hull as an entrance and punching through a road to LeClaire to where there already is an existing light as an exit. Is that something that might be a possibility?
I can comment on that, Carmen. We're still doing our kind of fact finding. I think we were excited about that idea just because it could take advantage of the light that is already there at LeClaire and could create a controlled four-way intersection. I think the challenge we ran into that we're still investigating is that there's a existing pump house that is very expensive piece of infrastructure that is right at that corner that may complicate our ability to get a four-way intersection to work in that position. There already is a gate and an entry there, I believe, but getting that to actually perform as a two-way intersection might be a challenge. There was some discussion about actually coupling that with Hull and looking at different ways that you could look at one-way, looking at Hull and LeClaire, the extension of LeClaire as being a system, a network of one-ways that might minimize that and make it easier, but we weren't, for example, you could come in on a Hull and leave on LeClaire where you have a controlled intersection, but those are just, those have not been vetted. So we still need to do that work.
Thank you. Sam?
Hey, everybody. Just kind of going to echo a lot of good points that I've heard. I really like the ridge for its minimal. I think I'm echoing as well.
Hey, Bev, if you're unmuted, could you mute? Thank you.
Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, just to echo a good couple points I heard, I really like the ridge for its minimal wetland. In keeping the park natural is really trying to keep all of its wetlands and natural areas clear. And again, an echo as if we can figure out the traffic ingress and access from that ridge point, that would be my biggest concern. But I think that overall, I like that spot for its views and its staying out of the natural zone of the park.
Thank you, Sam. Bev, do you have comments?
Thank you very much. I guess I'm on the echo. I am very upset about building the library out in Empire area. I would like to go store all the books temporarily somewhere and rebuild the downtown area for a proper 2-3 story library and fix parking for the community. Thank you for all of you for all this, but we have been in Coos Bay for over 50 years, and we can still drive and walk to our nice local library. Sorry for the echo. And I don't want to damage Empire Lakes anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev, for your comments. I'm not sure who came back up first, but we'll go with Carmen.
Yeah, I'm sure that the hacker team will probably want to respond to this, but I can just give you a little bit of background, Bev, on the reason why we're going out here, or the reason why the City Council and the Library Steering Committee has chosen this particular location. There is nowhere downtown Coos Bay that is out of the tsunami inundation zone that would accommodate the library. Many years of investigation has brought us to this point. Many in the Library Steering Committee wanted it downtown. The City Council wanted it downtown, but there are a lot of merits to having it in Empire. First off, there is a large population of families out here, and Empire is really, in my perspective, in need of some good investment. The other thing is it is out of the tsunami inundation zone and will make a great meeting place for any types of natural disasters or emergency situations. The park setting is something that I've always wanted to see for the library, whether it was, in Coos Bay, downtown proper, or out here in Empire. I completely understand your desire to see it out in the downtown, and I think that that's going to be the biggest hurdle for the bond measure. But it's just, we're going to have to do a lot of education as the city and the people who are trying to steer this potential location, educating the public as to why it's out here and why we're heading in this direction. The other locations that were on the potential slate for the library location were, off of Ocean Boulevard, and then there was also one at the old Gussie's location, but those were, different situations, and ultimately the City Council decided to go forward with the parks location. Personally, I think parks, being such public places, are great locations for public investments in infrastructure, and being able to have a wonderful view and an access to a park, and then that crossover of usership has a lot of benefits. You go to the park and you're with your kid, and then all of a sudden you're at the playground and you're like, oh, let's go pick up a book or an audio tape or whatever it might be. And then there's a lot of different activities that revolve around the library's programs, and that will, I think, lend themselves really well to the park setting. So I hear you on that, on the sentiment of having it downtown. I wish it would be easier for us to cite that, but I think it's going to be very difficult.
Thank you.
I don't
Carmen.
think it's going to be difficult. It is difficult. There just really wasn't a location.
Thank you, Carmen. Sam? Back to you, Sam. Nope, took his hand down. All right. Any other additional commissioner comments? Coco?
Yes, one of the questions I have, because it had been brought up in a previous library presentation, was the continuing utilization going forward with IT connectivity for library users. And I know there's a lot of investment that's being put in on the backbone of fiber, but when you get fiber to the prim, you have to have someone available for the cards and the distribution within a building. Has that been addressed in terms of positions with the city to facilitate that, or an outside contractor, and in the building design? Thank you.
We haven't really got to that level of detail yet in the project, but I assume we would talk to the city about that connectivity being possible for our siting. Unless, Sammy, you know anything more?
No, that's the extent of